Hey golfers, how are you doing? Obviously I'm sitting cross-legged right now, and that's what this video is going to be about. I'm going to take you through this sitting position and several other sitting and resting positions that are an alternative to sitting in a chair. And I'm going to explain to you why these are important positions for you to start doing in your own life, and explain why they will help you in the context of golf and help you shoot some better scores. So the first thing is to know is that we just sit in chairs way too much in our society. And there's nothing wrong with sitting and resting. I mean, we need time to rest. We all work hard. We need some time to rest. But just by sitting in a chair too much, we can develop some muscle imbalances. So these sitting postures, these resting postures, just give us an alternative way to sit and rest without doing so much damage to your body. And the problem with chairs, as I'm just going to shift in just a deep squat position here, the problem with chairs is that they lead to our hips and our mid-back becoming really tight. Because usually most of us, when we sit in chairs, we're folded forward our hips, our posture gets a little bent over like that. So our mid-back starts getting very tight, our hips start getting very tight. And in the context of golf, as golfers, when our mid-back's tight, it makes it really hard to move properly the way we want to in a swing. And also when those hips and mid-back are really tight, usually we'll end up compensating by putting too much strain on our low back. So that's why so many golfers have low back pain. It's often because their hips and mid-back are so tight that the low back ends up taking way more load on it than it can handle. And all of a sudden we get these back pain flare-ups. So low back pain and also a decrease in performance can be caused by having these tight hips and mid-back, and obviously neither of those things are good for golf, right? So one thing I really like about just resting in these poses and these different sitting positions, as I'm moving into a long sit position here, you can do this one with your feet straight out in front of you, or also to the side. I like to alternate back and forth. But one thing that I really like about sitting in these sitting postures is that I don't need so much time dedicated for an alternative stretching and mobility routine. So I find when I spend a lot of time sitting in a chair, I start to get that mid-back tightness, that hip tightness, and I have to offset it with some kind of complex mobility plan. But I found since I've started adopting these resting postures, since I'm not working myself into such extreme muscle imbalances, I don't have to spend as much time working on mobility. Basically, I'm working on mobility while I'm resting rather than damaging my body while resting and having to offset it with the mobility plan. So I find it much more efficient just to be able to sit in these resting positions rather than having to have a separate mobility plan. And I like to do them kind of as often as I can, whenever I'm resting. So, if I'm watching TV at home, talking to my wife at home, even on phone calls, things like that, even when working. And this is just a low kneel position here. So I got my tush down on my feet here. So I'll even try to do it while working. Sometimes when I'm working on my phone, I'll even pull out my laptop and maybe grab a chair. It can be a little funky to find the right height. You might have to try it several different platforms, but sometimes I'll just work in this low kneel position while on my laptop, on this chair, rather than sitting at the desk and sitting on my chair. So really, basically whenever I'm resting, I try as much as I can to rest in these positions rather than resting in a chair. That's what I try to do. Obviously in practice I end up resting in chairs because I'm a human being, but that's what I try to do and I try and strive to do. And one thing I really like about these poses, sorry my head's a little caught off there, but as I'm just moving into high kneel position, so one thing I really like about these poses is that when we're sitting in a chair, the same muscles are flexed or extended the entire time. But when I'm going through these different movements here, I alternate between having joints flexed and extended. So for instance, my knees in this low kneel were really in deep flexion. As I move up, my knees aren't as flexed. Same thing with my hips. My hips were flexed when I was in this low kneel, they extend when I'm in this high kneel. So the joints aren't staying in the same position the entire time, they're alternating between flexion and extension. So it just gives her less time for harmful muscle imbalances to develop. And as you're in these resting positions, might not be possible depending on what you're doing, but if you're just watching TV or something like that, I like to add some little movements to them. So for instance, doing some lunging, I call this a step out. So I'll sit in these step out positions. And then I like adding all sorts of just random twists, reaches, turns in different directions, shoulder circles. And I'll try and do that basically in all the poses, adding as many different twists and reaches as I can. Like I said, again, those shoulder circles. Well, these movements pretty randomly, to be honest. But I like doing it because now all of a sudden I'm adding some bending and some bending of my spine, some rotation, some extension. In a golf swing, our spine doesn't just rotate back and forth, it also has to be able to bend forward, sideways, extend. So just by adding these random movements in there, really helps free up that mid-spine a little bit. And then those shoulder circles, of course, they're great for just working on a rotator cuff. So I like to add some movements. Even though I'm in a resting pose, I like to add some movements whenever possible. And the last resting posture I want to show you is just a side sit posture. You might know it as deer pose or the 90-90 stretch. But one thing to keep in mind, just when you're doing these postures, is you want to keep your spine as tall as possible. And if that's impossible for you to do, say if you're on the ground, you end up hunched to the side, use some bolsters, okay? Just support your joints, make it as easy as it needs to be for you to stand nice and tall. Over time, you can lower the bolster. I've just got a blanket there. Even go down to the ground. But you want to be able to stand tall, and you don't want to be in pain, okay? If at any point you feel some sharp pain in any of your joints, you need to make it easier. Grab a bolster, do something that's going to make the stretch or the resting position easier for you. For instance, for a deep squat, if this really hurts your knees being down though, and you can't keep your back straight, give yourself a prop to sit on. So take some pressure off your knees, some pressure off your spine, or some pressure off your knees and allows your spine rather to sit taller. So my rule of thumb though, with all that said, is if a posture is hurting you, and if you aren't able to keep your spine tall in this posture, for instance, this side sit is a very, very tough one for me. I always end up crumpled over to the side here. So if it is hard for you to do, and if it hurts a little bit, I actually suggest doing it more, not less, with the huge caveat that you're going to make an adjustment that will make it easier so that it doesn't hurt anymore, and then slowly make it easier over time. So if you can't stay tall, if you can't, and it hurts, it's kind of tempting to avoid the posture, say, oh, I should stay doing it, shouldn't do that. But the reality is you should probably do it more because there's clearly something you need to work on there. But for goodness sake, just make it easier, give yourself some props and bolsters so that you can ease into the posture in a way that isn't hurting your body and is actually feeling good and gently stretching the muscles that are tight rather than causing sharp joint pain for you. So that's all I have for you. I really hope that you find these resting postures really helpful for you. I think you'll find some will naturally be easy for you, some will naturally be hard for you. But I do think if you adopt this practice, it'll actually really help your golf game out, and it'll help you shoot lower scores just while you're resting. So if you have any questions for me, please post them in the comments below. And if you have any suggestions for some other resting postures that you think I should adopt and that I may have missed out, please let me know. And if you want to shoot some lower scores and want some help with your game, please subscribe. There'll be more tips coming on this channel that'll help you get better at golf. Thanks a lot.